Mahoraga and Jogo. These are two forces of nature that have faced off against the overwhelming power of Ryomen Sukuna. Both of these beings in their fight were able to display high levels of destructive power and competency within battle in spite of their respective losses. So in this video, I'll be pitting these two characters against one another, and by the end of it, you should understand why Jogo versus Mahoraga isn't close. So, starting with Jogo, let's just take a look at what he can do. He's kind of the jobber of the JJK verse, but I think he gets a little bit too much hate, considering that he's a pretty strong character. And Nob, do you want to jump into some of his feats, some of what he can do in the series?
Yeah, of course. So you already know I'm the biggest Jogo stan. I love Jogo. I think he's a great character. He gets a really bad rap, and the reason why he gets a bad rap is because he fights literally two of the strongest characters in the entire series. But at the same time, we can still use these fights to get a decent amount of ideas of where he scales and where his power level really sits. I mean, before we even see him fight, he basically compares himself to 8 or 9 fingers, which I've heard some people kind of play into contention with that. I'm still a firm believer. I feel like that's still a pretty accurate way to judge, considering when he does end up fighting Sukuna, despite him getting absolutely mollywopped, he does, although, admit that while the power gap is huge, he doesn't say so much that he thinks he was wrong in assuming he was 8 to 9 fingers. He's just surprised that 8 to 9 fingers to 15 was such a huge power boost. But either way, like, when he fights Gojo, he's confident enough when talking to Kenjaku at first to think, like, there's no way the humans have a sorcerer that could even come at my level. And we can see why he feels that way when, even though some of them were tired, he does literally pull up on about 3 almost grade 1, 2 grade 1s, 1 semi-grade 1 sorcerer in about less than 10 seconds. He takes them all out.
Yeah.
Even though some of them may be tired, and that may be a little bit of an excuse, that's still no feat on its own that he was able to completely demolish 3 sorcerers that quickly.
Yeah.
That shows a lot for his speed. It says a lot for his attack power, and just overall the versatility in his attacks that we've seen. When he fights Gojo, he uses the ember insects. He can make volcanoes appear out of basically nowhere. He has his own fire techniques which can be manipulated. He can use different other kind of beam techniques. He's very versatile, and he's a very quick, very powerful fighter, and although he doesn't have a lot of durability, he seems to survive a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about comparisons and you want to just compare him outright to the 3 sorcerers that you mentioned, just use Naobito and Nanami's statement where they just say, compared to Dagon, this curse is on a completely different level. And I mean, we saw what Dagon was doing to them. Exactly. Dagon was like, okay, yeah, Naobito, you're kind of fast, but Naobito was laying into Dagon with several punches, and Dagon kind of just ate them all and then opened a domain expansion because of how much more powerful he was. Maki mentions that one of Dagon's casual attacks could have killed her in 1 hit if Naobito didn't save her. Nanami is like, the ratio technique is just not working on him. Dagon is a special grade and a very powerful one, and Jogo just comes in and makes him look weak in comparison, right? Just from the mouths of Naobito and Nanami, they're just like, this guy's different. He's scary. And I mean, he shows up and he perception blitzes Maki and Nanami. Naobito's the only one that ever even reacts, and then Jogo still catches him off guard with the volcanoes. So clearly Jogo is not someone to be messed with unless you're Sukuna and Gojo. Outside of that, Jogo's a pretty strong character for a majority of the verse. Even with the Gojo fight, we see that Jogo's competent enough to have his own domain expansion. We see that he gets hit with a point blank red and kind of just comes out of it ready to still throw hands. So he's a pretty powerful character and has some interesting versatility. He has the bugs, he has the, like you said, the volcanoes, the earth manipulation, he has the maximum technique, which Sukuna even says that would have damaged him if it hit him, which is once again a pretty good feat to mention, considering that Sukuna was at 15 figures at the time and is a pretty strong character just outright. So Jogo is not someone to be laughed at. He's not someone that I think is super weak in any regard. He probably gets, like you said, a lot of hate just because the main 2 fights that he shows up in, he gets bodied, but it's because it's by Gojo and Sukuna, the literal top tiers of the JJK verse.
Would have loved to have seen anyone else do better.
Exactly. They're really, you can't really pick a person that's gonna fight Gojo and not look like an absolute idiot. I mean, we even have some statements from Gege where while Jogo is not quite as durable as someone like Hanami, he would just outright beat him. He's just a stronger cursed spirit. This means that Jogo should be able to 1v2 Todo and Yuji. Hanami obviously was able to do that and probably could have come out with a bit of a good win if he brought out his domain expansion and Gojo didn't interrupt. So I mean, Jogo's out here being able to scale to people that can 1v2 Todo and Yuji, which is a powerful dynamic duo as we see in Shibuya. So Jogo is a very, very, very powerful cursed spirit, and he's someone that I think is somewhat downplayed in the community just because of the people he fights. Now, we're gonna be comparing him to another very, 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 very powerful curse, or Shikigami rather, and that'll be Mahoraga. And to talk about Mahoraga a little bit, I think it's interesting, or it's good that they both fight the same Sukuna, because that just gives us a direct line of scaling. We see that Mahoraga seems to push Sukuna a bit more in the physical department. I don't know if you would agree on that. Like, Sukuna seems to take Mahoraga a bit more seriously than he does Jogo. Jogo seems to be a little bit more of a joyride for him, whereas Mahoraga is quite a bit more powerful. He sends Sukuna flying like through several buildings. Sukuna just outright says that if he was a cursed spirit, if he was in a cursed spirit's body, even with his same power, Mahoraga would have just one-shot him due to the reverse curse technique flowing through his blade. So that presents quite a big of a problem for Jogo, and what's something that I think goes under the radar, Sukuna didn't seem to know that it was made out of reverse curse technique until it made contact with him. So you might be able to call into question whether or not Jogo would even know to avoid this rather than block it.
Well, yeah, I guess that really comes down to different fighting styles as well. Well, one thing I will definitely agree with is that Sukuna definitely treats Mahoraga way more as a threat, something that can actually take him out if he doesn't take it seriously and actually, one, analyze the situation correctly and figure out what's the best way to do it. Whether that has anything to do with the fact that Mahoraga's kind of whole ability, you really kind of have to kind of nip it in the butt before it gets anywhere. So one thing I definitely think Jogo would do differently compared to Sukuna is I definitely don't think he'd be taking any sword attacks directly or blocking them with his hand. And whether we can take that in a way of what we've seen from Jogo already, and also I would pair that with what we've seen Gege say about Jogo, in that Jogo would not be able to take the same kind of damage that someone like Hanami did against Todo and Yuji. So I feel like someone like Jogo is a completely different kind of fighter, whereas he's most likely, if he's up against someone like Mahoraga, would most likely keep his distance, whereas rather like someone like Gojo, who he had underestimated completely, he was being kind of cocky from the very beginning, and Sukuna, who couldn't even give him 2 seconds to breathe.
Yeah, for sure. Mahoraga definitely would be, I think he's not necessarily as aggressive as a fighter as Sukuna, and I mean, we just know outright that he's not as strong either. One thing that's interesting though is Mahoraga's durability is really, really high, at least relative to Jogo's, because we see that Jogo, when Dismantle and Cleave is used on him, every single time it is shown, it cleaves through his body outright. There's not a single time where Jogo is able to block it or keep it from going through his entire body, but even with Mahoraga's first attempt of blocking it, or rather than attempt, the first time he gets introduced to Sukuna's curse technique, he's actually able to survive it, and it doesn't cleave right through his body, demonstrating that, you know, while it's still doing damage to him, it's pretty impressive because he's able to survive with mainly surface level wounds, and then he heals, right? And then after that, we see that he's able to adapt and then deflect, be fast enough to see it and then deflect the attack, which obviously speak towards its speed and speak towards its adaptability, which I think is kind of the elephant in the room in just about any fight that includes Mahoraga. Do you think Jogo has the ability to take down Mahoraga before he adapts to all of his abilities and techniques?
I think the tough part for Jogo would really be that, is while he is pretty versatile in the level of techniques that he has, they all kind of come up with the same result, right? They all kind of are based off the same element of fire. They all kind of are based off of whether it be ember insects that explode, it's an explosion of fire. Whether it be, you know, plumes of volcanoes that release lava, the end result is fire.
Yeah.
So I feel like Jogo's main problem is going to be getting to survive long enough in the fight to even discover what Mahoraga's whole, you know, shtick really is.
Yeah.
To be completely frank, because as we've seen when he comes out against Sukuna, he starts ready to go with the positive energy sword. So he doesn't even need to. Sukuna got lucky, to be completely honest, the first time he fought him. And if that's the case where Mahoraga lands a hit on Jogo, Jogo doesn't have that same kind of luck.
Yeah. It's literally going to bypass his very being and just could just cut right through him. I mean, we've seen what it looks like when Yuta uses reverse curse technique on a curse spirit, right? It just absolutely destroys them. He doesn't even have to try that hard. So someone like Mahoraga attacking Jogo, and if Jogo is caught, because I think in terms of speed, in terms of scaling like that, they should be in a similar base state. Jogo versus Mahoraga should be a pretty close-pitched physical battle. I think maybe even with Mahoraga having the slight advantage if you think that Sukuna's seriousness kind of portrays that. So it's not like Jogo's going to be blitzing him around the battlefield, completely avoiding him or anything. They're going to be somewhat close in speed. So if Mahoraga gets a lucky shot, Jogo is in serious trouble, if not outright losing the fight right then and there. And as you said, his abilities, while diverse in terms of what they can do, the effect is very similar. They're mostly fire-based or rock-based attacks. So as we've seen, Sukuna with his domain expansion kind of realizes, oh, he didn't just adapt to dismantle, he adapted to slashing attacks in general, which is why he was able to survive the domain expansion, and he was coming back. He was like, all right, I'm ready for round 3, and that's why Sukuna has to bring out the fire arrow and blow him up and kill him in one shot. So if Jogo lands a burning attack, and let's say it does significant damage to Mahoraga, but he fixes himself, Jogo has eliminated burning attacks from his useful arsenal. From that point on, Jogo has to use something else. And it's not like Jogo is going to punch Mahoraga to death, right? He's not going to be out here throwing hands with him hard enough to get rid of him. I mean, maybe if you think Maximum Meteor is a primarily rock-based attack, so it doesn't really count as like fire, but then you would have to just say Mahoraga is just going to sit there and just eat it instead of trying to attack Jogo or avoid it in some capacity, and I think that's kind of unlikely. All in all, I think even though they start in a very similar place power-wise, I'm just trying to think of a scenario where Jogo can come out with a victory, because Mahoraga's hacks just seem to pretty clearly deal with Jogo's, or really anybody that doesn't have a variety of different forms of abilities that completely like alter the structure of their technique or the element that they use.
Yeah, Mahoraga, I feel like even presents somewhat of a challenge, not to say that they beat them completely, but I think even Mahoraga would be a challenge for someone like Gojo.
Yeah.
With Gojo's all-encompassing power and everything. And it really comes down to, I mean, Mahoraga was shown, even though it was able to adapt to slashing techniques, it survived an entire domain expansion from Sukuna. So I feel like even if, Maximum Meteor was to do a lot of damage to Mahoraga, if Mahoraga isn't taken out by that and it survives, that's it.
Yeah.
Jogo doesn't have anything that's going to follow up. Thankfully, Sukuna even had his fire arrow.
Yeah.
Sukuna was even... that Mahoraga's ability to adapt is really powerful. And like you just said, unless you have someone that has the versatility of different elements or versatility of different kinds of techniques that can be used one after the other in succession that both have similar destructive power, Jogo really just doesn't stand much of a chance. And like you said, Jogo, we don't see Jogo going up and punching Mahoraga, because as we touched on before, even if he does get up close and personal, he's at a constant threat of just literally just not existing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even if he brings out his trump card, right, he's like, all right, maximum technique doesn't work, domain expansion. It doesn't really matter because all of those attacks are rock and fire based in nature. So Mahoraga is just going to sit there being like, cool, I've done with this, been there, done that. We're going to be throwing more hands. And Jogo does not have the ability to cycle out a different technique, right? It's not like it's not like he's the inverse of Sukuna, he can just bring out a slashing technique. No, once Mahoraga has adapted to Jogo's arsenal, once Mahoraga has basically got a lock on everything that Jogo has, the question is, how long does it take for Mahoraga to take Jogo down rather than can Jogo win, right? It doesn't really become that kind of fight anymore. And I think that Jogo, even though he's strong and even though he's somewhat downplayed, I think in comparison to a hacks monster like Mahoraga, will simply fall, just like Three Finger Sukuna thought he would, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with you. I feel like, unfortunately, Jogo, while he does get undermined in a lot of different scaling, he does get undermined in a lot of different versus battles. I feel like this is one where he just unfortunately doesn't have much to do to give him a win condition, and that's not his fault. As a resident of the Jogo fan club, I definitely say that it's not his fault, because most people would probably share the same fate.
Yeah, I mean, Mahoraga is he's a trump card for a reason. He's a very, very difficult thing to deal with. It's just, the hacks is just too insane, right? If you hit him once and you don't kill him in that one attack, which, I mean, let's be honest, right? Jogo was holding back versus Nanami, Naobito, and Maki, obviously, but that seems to be kind of how he attacks initially in character. If he didn't finish them off, he's not finishing Mahoraga off with that. Maharaga's gonna clear the smoke. Jogo's gonna be like, okay, so you're a little bit strong. He's gonna hit him with another fire attack. I don't know if you think Jogo's necessarily a super intelligent combatant. I didn't get that vibe from him. I don't think he's dumb by any means, but he just seems a sort of an average level intellect in fights. You might even be able to say Jogo just wouldn't know why his attacks aren't working. He may just think it's pure durability. And that would make it even worse because he wouldn't switch up any attacks. He would just think that, wow, this guy, I just gotta hit him harder with more cursed energy, right? And that would just lead to him, you know, eventually getting caught. Maharaga's just like, cool, fire and rocks don't hurt me anymore. I'm gonna hit you really hard now.
Exactly. It literally would get Jogo would end up in ash, and that's because he'd get punched so hard he would literally just burn. Like you just blow to smithereens.
Yeah. So all in all, I think Mahoraga is the pretty clear victor in this fight. I think he's kind of got it handily over someone like Jogo. Unfortunately, because I'm a big fan of Jogo too, so this is kind of hard to record. You know, my heart is aching for Jogo's character right now, but it is what it is. Mahoraga's kind of just better than him in every category that matters for this fight. So I think me and Noah would agree that Mahoraga is the victor here.
Yes, he is.
Yep. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to subscribe to both me and Noah. We've been kind of on a little bit of a versus battles binge. You're going to be seeing a lot of collabs between us on both of our channels. So if you guys don't want to miss any of those and see all of those, make sure to subscribe to both of us and check out the playlist that I'm going to have in the right-hand corner here. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.